One nation under God, it's plain to see. We're showing the whole world what a country should be. United we stand in America, hand in hand in America. Together as one in a land that we love. United we stand in America.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, August 28th. My name is Dr. Mary Byrne, and my co-host Lynn Morris is out of the studio today because he has, you might say, event at work that he has to cover. And so I am here going solo again, but I have brought you an outstanding guest to kick off the school year. Her name is Bridget Bidinger. She is on the school board of Nixa School District here in Missouri, which, by the way, is in Lynn Morris's district.
Yep.
That's right. So, and he was wanting to spend more time with you.
I know. I'm sorry I missed him.
He was very pleased to advertise that Nixa was the largest school district in his county. So, but he can watch this show once it's posted.
That's right. He's blessed with some solid school districts, I will say.
Yes.
Ozark is solid.
And he's very proud of his public schools there. He does his best
He
to
stays
support
engaged.
you.
Yep.
Yes, he does.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're going to get started with the show, but before we start, because I don't like to break up the conversation, I'd like to thank our hosts at the beginning. One of our hosts is Brad Pistole of Trinity Insurance. If you caught last week's show, Brad was with us, an outstanding man of faith who uses his career in finance as a ministry to help support his clients in the best possible portfolios for their retirement. We highly recommend Brad. And so it's Brad Pistow at Trinity Insurance and Financial Services. His number is 417-581-9222. If you want to get to know more about Brad, please go back and watch last week's show. Also, we have his information scrolling across the bottom of the screen. So if I've spoken too fast, you have plenty of opportunity to copy that information down. Our other sponsor is Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia. Once again, if you are looking for a car, whether it's new or used, this is the season to buy. The fall season, before new models come in, they're very willing to listen to your needs and figure out a package that will fit your wallet. Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia are at 417-882-3838. So give them a call and help our sponsors sponsor us. Thanks so much. Well, Bridget, this is exciting for me because you know I'm passionate about education. That was my career path, and now it's my advocacy path.
Yep.
And I find you particularly interesting because you kind of moved into Southwest Missouri, landed on your feet and said, I'm running for school board.
Yes.
And so I want to know more about that. When did you decide you had to respond to the call to run for election in an area that was new for you?
Yes.
I mean, and it's amazing because the community usually supports people who've been, lifelong residents. You're right. You could call it entrenched, but you could say familiar, right?
Yes.
But you went right after it and you won.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, I had been in the Nixa community for since 2014, and around 2019-ish, I started to get this sense that something within the public education system was starting to go awry.
You had children in the
district?
district?
Yes, I had two. And it wasn't so much from Nixa at all. Actually, it stemmed from the fact that from my previous group of friends in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, was about 10 of us. We all had our children.
Another hot button city.
Another hot button city, yes. But we were in the northeast side of Atlanta in a very sought after district, Gwinnett County. People moved to that county for the school district. And the elementary school my children came from was the number 4 elementary school in the state. But around 2019, and in talking with these friends, several of them started pulling their children from the public school system in either homeschooling or private school. And then the following spring, in actually February of 2020, several of us were on a trip.
We're talking COVID period.
We're talking right at the cusp of COVID shutdown. And we're talking, and 2 more friends. And there was at that point, 2 more friends said at the end of the school year, we're going to do private. So at that point, it was my family and 1 other that still remained in public school.
In your circle of
in my
friends.
circle of friends from Georgia. And I thought, what is going on? And I felt still, I think I almost experienced some cognitive dissonance because I really felt safe and secure in our area in Southwest Missouri from any of the things that they were sharing. Then 2 weeks later, as you know, the world shut down. And as the months went on in that year, I think everyone who was remotely engaged in their children's learning understood that so many things that we had taken for granted within the public school system, and even education in general, there were glaring misses, right? Whether it be it's almost like COVID pulled back the curtain.
Yes.
And opened our eyes to some things that had been percolating for quite some time, right? And so as that next school year went on, and I would talk to friends in different parts, or family members in different parts of the country, particularly in progressive areas, things such as masking or unmasking, sexually explicit books in the library, things like the tenets of CRT and DEI seeping into the curriculum. And at that point, I thought, again, surely that is not happening in Nixa. And honestly, I didn't uncover that, but it came a point, I think, the spring of 2021, when I had heard about, it just got closer and closer. So for example, I heard about in Springfield where they were impressing upon the staff to do culturally responsive training and handing out images of the genderbread man.
Right, and so they always use those euphemisms like culturally responsive training when actually they were talking about white supremacy.
Correct.
And forcing teachers to identify as white supremacists if their
Right.
skin was white.
And to acknowledge that they were sitting on land that was originally,
Right.
For the Indians. And another friend of mine had her nephew in Wentzville School District, and his teacher had them do a white privilege walk.
Yes.
And so at that...
And those are the tenets of CRT that we're
Correct.
talking about. No, you don't teach directly the legal arguments and literature about critical race theory, which is what we've been accused of when they say,
Right.
no, we're not
Right.
teaching CRT.
Right.
Well, no, you're not
Right.
teaching the law class. But you
Right.
are teaching the tenets of
Right.
CRT in the content and trying to engineer
Yes.
a different social structure.
Guide and shape and mold their
Yeah.
thought process.
Their thought
And,
processes.
and their worldview and how they view themselves and how they view others, right?
Yes. Into the oppressor-oppressed
Correct.
categories.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yep.
And so that next school year, I just started connecting with other moms and and just other stakeholders in the community.
And what were the opportunities to do that? Was it clubs, a church? What?
Yep, and so I think as most people, it's not indicative of just me, but I think a lot of people during that time frame, particularly that first 18 months, we realized that local politics and what happens in our backyard actually impacts us in a far greater way than what happens in Washington, D.C., right? And so I had started getting engaged with clubs or groups and organizations such as the Republican Central Committee, Concerned Women of America, and just going to some city council meetings, more school board meetings, and speaking sometimes. And that afforded me the opportunity to forge relationships with other people that were also concerned about some of the same things, or at least wanted to be informed.
So were Nixa's school board meetings televised?
No.
No, okay.
No. And, I can say, other than the one school board meeting where the decision was going to be determined whether they were going to mask that 2021-2022 school board year, they were never contentious. And, my school district started out on the right foot during COVID. We were seated. In fact, we were seated the summer of 2020. And so I very much appreciated that stance. Then the following year, the decision was, do we continue to mask? And there was proponents on both sides of that aisle. And the school board and our superintendents said, we are not going to mask. They had put other protocols in place that they felt would help mitigate the spread. And that was such I feel like, a stand that I felt like they took, because every district around us was going toward, especially Springfield, no, we're still going to mask. They were still hybrid at that point.
Well, that had a lot to do with our health director
Yes.
for Greene
Yes.
County,
Right.
Springfield.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Which
yep.
will not happen again according to state law.
Right. Yeah.
But
so
it's
some positive
because of
changes.
that incident
Yes.
afterwards.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think what I appreciate about that school board is that it really did exercise local control on that issue.
Mm-hmm. It did.
And that's what's being eroded away. You do have local control if you have a board that will stand in the gap
Correct.
between the local district and the state board.
Correct.
And that's our problem here, is the state board is the conduit of every bad idea that comes out of Washington, D.C.
Right. Seemingly.
And seemingly. And then they have all kinds of grant money, and they have accreditation standards that filter down, try to mold those local school districts into the image of what Washington, D.C. wants. You have the power as a local board. Do you have the spine?
Right.
And in that particular issue, it was exciting
Right.
to
It was.
see that happen,
Yep.
because it wasn't just about being part of a resistance. It was about exercising our idea of governance, and that the district is independent of the city. You're a separate political entity, and actually you have the power to talk back.
Well, and quite frankly, I do not, when I spoke, it was to lend encouragement to the board in the decision to go that direction, because my expectation of the board or the school, quite frankly, wasn't to keep my child shielded from a virus, right? Particularly at that point in time, studies had already pointed to the fact that children's immune system would be able to tackle it. If compromised, that's a different story. So I wanted to convey my expectation of you is to ensure that the classroom is an environment where they're learning and knowledge is being bestowed, not that you are protecting them per se from a virus.
Yes, and what's interesting is, the accommodation for not seating was the use of technology at home.
Right.
And nationwide, school districts can no longer find children that were once enrolled.
Right, I know.
They didn't log on.
I know.
Talk about, you might say, unrealistic expectations about kids.
Right.
And I think these people who are so locked into technology as a replacement for face-to-face education, the data is out there.
Yep. Yep.
Even if your kids are participating in that, they're not achieving at the same level
Right.
as face-to-face classrooms.
Well-
so yes, and that's your job as a board member to support children learning.
Right, right.
Yeah. So, moving into something a little more, I don't want to use the word intrusive, but a little more personal about how the decision to run for a public office like school board is actually a family commitment.
It is.
Yes.
It is.
So what were the conversations you had with your family to make that decision?
Well, I have two daughters, teenage daughters at the time, and
Are they embarrassed that mom is...
yes, there was a little bit of hesitation about that component of it. Oh my gosh, my mom would potentially be a school board member. How's that going to look? And but at the end of the day, the conversations we had centered around what do we want our school district to represent? What do I want their education to look like? What do I want their friends' education to look like? And can I be a part of a board that ensures it stays focused on those basics, for example? We had we're a family that's very open about discussing cultural issues, world issues, and so it wasn't a stretch when I voiced that, because at that point, I had already been going to some city council meetings and school board meetings and speaking. So they knew there was an interest from that standpoint. And so we prayed about it, and I had their support.
Yeah, I like your comment that you prayed about it, because you are a woman of faith. And so you don't make these decisions on knee-jerk reactions.
Correct.
Or out of a desire for power to the next elected position, which some people do. They try to build their public
Image.
image
And yes.
before
Stock.
they stock, grow some political capital and move on to the next position. But that wasn't your story.
No, not at all.
So how do you get the name idea of a person who lived in the area for just 5 years?
Yeah, well, I was involved in the school district, whether it be through PTA and other opportunities to engage. So I did have a semblance of connections within the school district. Both of my daughters are active in sports, cross country and track, and so. And then
So a lot of it is parent networking.
Correct, parent networking, and then again through that COVID time frame, was able to speak at within different organizations and volunteer, and so through that networking and forging relationships, some of them actually approached me. Why don't you run for school board?
It's like confirmation.
Yes. But even prior to that, as I was talking with other parents about some things and concerns and just questions, is that happening in Nixa? We ended up, there was 3 other parents, other moms. We ended up starting a parent group called Concerned Parents of Nixa, which has now grown to Concerned Parents of the Ozarks. There's over 400 people in that. And so through that process, I started to think through, okay, what does this look like? The decision to run also, I'll say, Mary, wasn't how do I run and save the Nixa School District? That wasn't even my thought process. It was, how do I become engaged with the school district and be a voice of reason and be a voice that not only looks at what's happening and cares about the direction of our district, but how are we looking at, like you said earlier, what's happening with the state? How are we watching what's happening in DC with the Department of Education, and how is that impacting Nixa School District in a way positively or negatively? Particularly, Nixa is, although we are diverse in many ways, we're still somewhat of a bedroom community, right, from Springfield.
Well, you're actually growing because people are choosing to leave Springfield
That is
and
correct.
go to Nixa.
That is correct.
Yes.
we hear that quite often.
Yeah.
Right?
So we may become your bedroom.
Yes. Yeah. And so how do I, my thought process was, how do I, as a board member, if given the opportunity to serve, be a stalwart, so to speak, as far as what's happening with potential ideologies or forced mandates that are coming in that are more than likely diametrically opposed to that which makes the Nixa school district great and the community's beliefs and core value system.
That's why you have local control.
Right.
Is so that the selections of the curriculum, the policies of the board reflect the culture of the community.
Yes.
But when you have organizations like Missouri School Board Association writing you model policies and a board that says, well, MSBA said it, we're going to adopt it.
Right.
Then they've surrendered
They've
their local
abdicated
control.
their-
They've abdicated. That's a good word.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a problem.
Right.
Because you're no longer, what you're creating with that is a de facto statewide school board
Correct.
through MSBA.
Correct. Whereas the lens must always be Nixa first.
And your community.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's incumbent on that locally elected board, and I will iterate that again, the elected board, not the hired superintendent.
Right.
Is the decision maker in the policies.
Right.
And so that's another struggle we have in other districts around here, but we're working on that. So as a parent, you make a sacrifice of time, talent, and treasure.
Yes.
Right? When you
Yes.
run for campaigns. So do you consider the sacrifice of you and your family for this to be a worthwhile investment in being salt and light in the community?
Yeah, I do. I do very much so. And the opportunity and the season of life that I'm in, I feel like God was instrumental in making this happen in the way that when we moved here from Georgia, I took a step back from the corporate world. So from
Corporate world, what were you doing?
Yeah, so I worked, my last ladder in the corporate world, I was with Macy's, and I was both a project manager in some capacities and then a business analyst. And so I was over, when in my license capacity as a project manager, I was over all of our licensed businesses. So
wow.
Starbucks, fine jewelry, furs, whatnot. So that was a very enjoyable position, and that was when my girls were young. And then in a business analyst capacity, when May Company and Federated merged, so Macy's and Riches, and I think here was called Foley's.
Well, we have a Macy's. I'm not so familiar with Foley's.
It was Foley's, I think,
Okay,
originally.
okay.
So there was a merging of all of the merchandising reporting that I had to,
All right. So you gave up working outside the home
right.
to
Be more
be
fully.
fully available to your family and to take on this responsibility for the community. Do you have any regrets?
No.
No, I don't
None.
either.
Yeah. No, I don't. It's both challenging and it's fulfilling at the same time.
Right.
And oftentimes thankless, but at the end of the day, I didn't go into this looking for attaboys.
Yeah. Which is, you might say, the reason that's interesting is because the 70s were so boisterous about women working outside the home.
Oh, I was very
As-
much that mindset initially.
As if women didn't have a true purpose unless they did that.
That's right.
And let me tell you, that's a lie.
That's a lie.
It's a lie.
That's a lie. I bought into it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And now that my daughter's 33 and we talk about these things, I said, look, I was working 60 hours a week for $40,000 a year. It really wasn't a hard decision.
Right.
I could not, as you were growing up and you were my only child, I could not justify not giving you every talent and time that I had to ensure that you had the best opportunity I could provide. Whether it's
Right.
the best opportunity in the world is another question.
Right.
But you know what? I do believe it was the best
Mm-hmm.
opportunity in the world because I was the parent.
Yep.
And I was there.
Yep.
And so
There's no more fulfilling job in the world.
no,
than being a
and I
mom.
used to embarrass her by showing up at school board meetings.
Yep.
I can't
But I
wait
hope
till
she looks
does
back
it.
now and says that you cared. She had an engaged parent.
She does. She even in college, she recognized the difference between her experience and other girls she was meeting. She said, "Mom, they have no moral compass."
Yeah.
And I go, "Right."
Right.
That,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that women
was perfect,
shouldn't
right.
work.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that if you have a child who needs your time, prioritize. You know, and it's like Phyllis Schlafly said. I had it all, just not all at once.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought
love
that was
that.
such wisdom.
I love that.
Right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
I'm able to reflect on everything I've done, the energy and the quality I was able to put into it. It's a wide breadth of different experiences, but I didn't try to juggle raising her with the intensity it took to do that job I was doing.
Right. Right.
So I like being intense. I just can't be intense with everything all at once.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Or
Yeah.
you die.
Yeah. Yeah. Or something falls through the cracks.
That's
Inevitably.
right. That's
Inevitably.
right. And sometimes it's your marriage.
Yep.
Right? So
Yep.
you choose. And fortunately, and this is where I get on with the family support, fortunately, I had a husband who understood
Right.
that
Right.
and supported
It was a partnership.
the comings and goings, the seasons in life. Yeah.
It's
So that
critical.
was good.
It's critical for
Yeah.
a successful family.
So, as a praying Christian, how has that impacted your work, really, in preparing your ideas for what you're going to say on the board when you read different policies and procedures? What's the influence? I mean, we're not there to make a church out of schools.
Right,
I
right.
mean, the scientific humanisms already did that. And actually, that's another
That's a whole
discussion
nother-
we could
yeah,
have. Yes.
yeah.
But the point is the principles of respect for the mind and respect for the developing emotions of a child are all embedded in our worldview, a biblical worldview.
Correct.
So how do you negotiate saying this is the values not just of Bridget Bidinger,
Right.
but of the Nixa community that you're involved with,
Right.
and get that reflected in your school policies?
Well, I mean, that's pretty thought-provoking. I think
Leave
that,
it to me.
Well, I think that for me, I've been asked a similar question in the past. You know, do you let your faith dictate, you know, how you make your decisions? And the answer is yes, because removing my faith and the Holy Spirit that indwells in me is not possible.
That's right.
It shapes my worldview.
And you're elected for the person you are. That's
Correct.
the whole
I
thing.
was
I don't
very
have
clear.
to apologize. I don't have to be something different. Look, I put myself out there when I was campaigning,
Yep.
and they chose me.
Yep.
So-
I was very clear. It's interesting that you brought that up. As I was knocking doors, and I've shared this before with people, and with the people that then had to run after me, because very rarely did people have to run for school board at Nixa. But you know why? It's not an offense to the district. In a sense, it's a compliment. It's twofold. It's a compliment because so many people felt that things were running right. Why do I need to run? But then also, pre-COVID, I think a lot of people were removed from what was happening in their own backyard, right? And
Right.
so there wasn't a sense to get engaged.
Well, you kind of trust your neighbor,
Right.
right? And you want
Right.
to believe that everybody's
Looking out for the-
mutually, looking out for each other, and that the values are shared. But I think that was the sneaky part that COVID unveiled is you really, unless you are aware of what's coming down from the state as the portal from Washington, D.C., unless you are aware that local control has been eroded for the last 30 years.
Right.
In a big way.
It has.
Hijacked. And hijacked. And that you have to fight back. I will rephrase that. It's been since 1980, 50, so what are we going to say, 40-some years.
Yep.
It's when the U.S. Department of Ed came in.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's been a key part. There was a slower erosion before that because businesses were taking over school boards saying we're the stakeholders, not the parents.
Right.
But once they got the foothold in Washington through the U.S. Department of Ed, then it multiplied. And unless people in local communities take back their local control, they're going to see it disappear. Not just erode, but disappear.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So that's why we're here.
But yeah, so I just one thing real quick I'll share that as I was knocking doors, trying to engage with the voters, 8 out of 10 people asked me, are you a conservative and are you a Christian?
So it's not like you were putting it out there.
Yeah,
It's like they prompted you to ask the question.
Well, and what's interesting is like right after I had my website up, I think I didn't shout on the website that I was a Christian per se, but I was talking about some of the things that I was involved in, and teaching Sunday school was one of them. And I got this email from somebody that I never knew, never met since, and he wrote a very nice email. I loved all of your content on your website. We need somebody like you, a fresh perspective. And he said, it sounds like you're a Christian. Don't shy away from sharing that.
Yeah.
So it was interesting.
So what's been your most gratifying experience being on the board?
Honestly, I would say not a singular moment, but times in which I'm in the school buildings and I'm engaging with the teachers and the principals and the students themselves, and really seeing the front line, so to speak, on the culture, what's the culture that's happening in our buildings, is my understanding of the culture and the mission at the higher level being disseminated the way we think it is.
Yeah.
So that's
are your policies actually being executed?
policies, procedures, and again, just guidance, for lack of the culture. How is that?
And that's what I keep going back to our school board with, is that it's not about the culture you necessarily want to create. It's the culture. Let me put it this way. You are beholden to state law.
Yeah.
And our Department of Ed isn't always consistent in what it's telling in the policies vis-a-vis state law. But when push comes to shove, if you're sued, a court's going to look at the law.
Right.
And things like curriculum, discipline policy, it's very, very clear. There is no other agent authorized to make those decisions. It's the board.
Right.
So my big campaign is to make every school board member literate in state law regarding their responsibilities.
Yep.
And because
when we're sworn in, we take an oath to uphold the Missouri Constitution.
and you
And the
agree
US
that you are
Constitution.
accountable to the law.
Yep.
That's right. So I think there's going to be some, you might say,
Pushback.
house cleaning.
Or house cleaning.
House cleaning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
So what response do you give to people who say, God is sovereign, therefore I just have to pray? I don't necessarily go out to vote. How does, I mean, that's not just a national issue. That's right down here in the school board.
Well,
Because our school boards are elected in April. You have to get out for your special local elections,
Right.
separate from 2 other elections in the year for your primaries and
The
your
turnout is
state
so
national.
low, and it's so important. August and April are almost more important than November.
I agree. I agree.
It's so
You can't
disappointing.
complain about a candidate if you didn't select the one you wanted in the primary.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This past August was really disappointing. There was so much effort by so many groups and organizations to get people out to vote, and there was only a 1.5% increase from 2022 in voter turnout.
Yeah.
I blew my mind
Yeah.
when I saw that. In Christian County, I'm speaking
Yeah.
of.
Because they
So-
think November makes all the difference.
So, back to your question, what would it look like if Joseph and Deborah and Esther, and even Isaiah, when he was called, what if they said, no, I'm not going to get engaged? Nah, I'm not going to get involved with government.
And you mentioned some very interesting figures. Deborah was a judge. Joseph was an administrator in government.
Yep.
Esther actually legislated
Yep.
with her uncle.
Yep.
Daniel was an official within the government. Because God was placing these figures inside one of the human institutions called governance, not to make it the church, but to influence the decision-making and the policies
Correct.
within those institutions. So if we're not present, we're victims.
Right.
That's how I look at it.
Well, so I 100% believe in God's sovereignty. Yes, God is sovereign, but He has placed each and every one of us here for such a time as
To be
this.
stewards.
To be stewards. He has gifted us with certain skills and abilities, and they are to be used for His purpose, to carry out His will, to carry out furthering the kingdom, quite frankly. So when we look at it from that perspective, that we serve a God who has already conquered, really, and has gone before us, we should be more willing to enter the fray, to be a voice of salt, to be a voice of truth. To be honest, I have to bite my tongue often when I hear people say things like that, because being salt and light has been something that's been heavy on my heart for the past 5 years. And, I feel that this is one way that God is using me to be just that, and not just on the school board, but in my community, within my family, within my church. You and I know we have the Cultural Impact Conference coming up.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yes,
We were going there.
and so things such as that. How do we gather more soldiers, so to speak, to work to transform? Instead of being salt and light, we now have a body of Christ that is looking to be sugar and cream, more so, looking to be relevant.
I have not heard that, but I like it.
I
Yes.
just thought of it, and it's like, why? We're called to be salt and light, to your
That's
point.
right. Because they are antiseptics.
Yeah.
Salt and light are
Yes.
antiseptics.
Yes.
So
Yes.
they're to cleanse
Yes.
a broken
Yes.
world.
Right. Right.
And that was the mission of Jesus.
Yep.
He's said, I've come back to reclaim the kingdom of God.
Right.
And to do that, he stood up to not just, you might say, wayward officials in the church, but he was killed by a government official who was in collusion with corrupted leaders, right? So the big showdown,
Or lacked a spine to stand up to them.
the big showdown was between Jesus, the government of Rome, and a corrupted church. But he stood his ground, not with violence, but by being the truth.
Right. Right.
And the good news is, yeah, they had their moment in the sun, right, when he was crucified, but he had the last word.
Correct. Correct.
And in the Great Commission, he says, now you go out and do it.
Right. Right.
And-
Right. He has promised us that he will return, right? But we are still called to occupy, not sit on the sidelines
Absolutely.
until he comes. And, again, I oftentimes have to bite my tongue because I'll be quick to not just share salt and light, but dump salt into the wound sometimes. And that's not his approach for us to have either. But it burdens me. The darker the world gets, the more I want to shout, and the more I want to spread light, the more I want to expose it, the more I want to try to, and then I need to remind myself that I need to do what I can to show what he offers that's so much better than
That's
what the world offers.
One of the guiding statements that early on when I started confronting what I saw as corruption in Jeff cities, particularly with regard to education, I said, so God, how's this going to work? They have the money, the power of government, and the platform of the media. And my eyes fell on the scripture, Ephesians 5:11. It says, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but expose them. And that's, that's my job.
Yep, that's
is
the path you've
The
been on.
rest
Yep,
of it
yep.
is up to him, right?
right.
But if I don't get out there and speak the truth, then the responsibility's on me.
Right.
So what
right.
would you tell listeners about your experience on being on the school board and having this new role now, even within your family? What would you tell them that we haven't discussed yet?
Well, I would just reiterate a little bit of the fact that right now it looks like we are in a deeply fallen world, right? You look at the headlines, you look at some of the atrocities that are being committed, not just in America, but around the world, right? And it's easy for us as believers to get discouraged or want to just curl up in a ball and pray that he comes and takes us quickly, right? Again, that's not what we're called to do. Seek the Lord. Ask him, where do you have me? Is it, and you might be in a season to where your family is all you need to focus on right now. You have littles, and you are raising up the next generation. Raise up future Esthers. Raise up future Daniels. Pour your heart into that mission field. If you're at a later stage in life, expand. Does God want you to expand that mission field? Is it being more involved and connected in a volunteer capacity in your community, in your church, right? And then ask the Lord, are you calling me to a leader type position? And ask him. He will show you. And don't wait until you feel like you have to be equipped. If he's calling you, he will equip you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure. Would you recommend that we invite people to look at your next school board website, your district website?
Sure. If you have
see what's going
questions, you can look at the nixapublicschools.com. If you have questions, we post when our board meetings are the second Thursday, unless they're typically the second Thursday of every month. We post the agendas several days ahead of time. And then again, I would just like to circle back and share again on that conference, the Cultural Impact Conference.
Right. So September 7, Saturday, September 7, beginning at 8:30 until about 5 o'clock, we're going to have a series of national speakers come. The registration for the Cultural Impact Conference is free. All you have to do is register so we have some idea that the church where it's going to be held was selected as a venue because it had a capacity of about 1,000. And that would be First Baptist Ozark. So it's here in Southwest Missouri. Speakers like Bill Federer and Tony Perkins.
Yep, Seth
and
Gruber.
Seth Gruber, who I'm really looking forward to seeing.
Yes.
Seth has that new 1916 project.
Yes.
Which
It's gonna be great.
exposes the racism and the death culture of
Abortion.
Right? And so there's
And some local leaders with the Pregnancy Center, Lisa McIntyre, and
right, and Grace. I'm
I'm
blanking
forgetting
on
her.
her.
Oh,
Yeah,
Jody Grace.
Jody Grace. I knew there was
with
a
the Freedom.
first name,
Yes,
two first
yes,
names.
Yes.
Yeah,
the Freedom
who has
Foundation.
a website out there. She'll be
Yes.
speaking too. And so the idea is not to take political sides, but to look at the issues through the
Yes.
lens of the Scripture.
Yes.
We recognize that neither party is blameless
Right.
in getting us to where we are now.
Right.
So what we want people to leave with, particularly pastors of churches, is that there is a scriptural foundation for our decision making. We had to know what that scripture says, and then become engaged to live by those principles and help others live because we did that. That's what it's really about.
Reclaim the public square.
Right. So go to ciconference.org,
Yes.
and which is the website, and register for free, as many people as you'd like. And look for the little link if you're interested in buying lunch there. There will be Chick-fil-A lunches available for sale, but they need to know how many to order. So, yeah, we have one more show here to publicize that conference. But we're doing it as frequently as possible so that as many listeners as possible. Make space on your calendar to do that. And there will be opportunities to learn from other people how to get engaged and how to get your churches engaged. So we look forward to that.
Yep,
Thanks
I'm
so much for
excited.
being
Yes,
with us.
thanks for having me. It's
My
been a pleasure.
pleasure. And we wish everybody a blessed week until we meet again.